Speaking of hope staying alive, though, man, like I like that the Bucks are trending in the right direction.
Yeah, defensively.
They're coming off of a big statement win over the Nuggets on Monday night, where Giannis was just like rampaging. I think it was like 36 and 18 in 30 minutes. And you're like, well, what the hell are you supposed to do with that?
Yep.
But this is a process versus results kind of dichotomy. And so you look at it and say, they're 3-5 since Doc got there. They haven't been lighting the world on fire. But the whole thing is, can you pluck the low-hanging fruit defensively? Can you get them into just a more stable environment? Even if you don't have great elite defensive personnel at the point of attack, we all know you move from Drew Holiday to Damian Lillard, you move off of Grayson Allen, you move off of Javon Carter, like the talent changes. And so you expect some slippage on the defensive end. But can you just like not give up the store on that end? And under Doc, they've gone from giving up the most transition opportunities in the league to tied for second fewest per game. They've gone from bottom 10 defense to just outside the top 10 in defensive efficiency, defensive rebounding rate, turnover percentage. Like they're doing the things that you need to do, the right kind of shot profile, which what they were doing under Adrian Griffin too, to some extent, but like I think 6th or 7th in shot attempts at the rim. They're right around the top 10 in limiting 3-point shots. So like the stuff that we know the Bucks to do, plus don't beat yourself on defense in transition. Turns out that when you do that, and then you have Giannis and Dame, you put yourself in pretty good position. So yeah, 3-5 doesn't look like any great shakes, but I think what you saw against the Nuggets is like, this is what the fully realized version of this can look like. You can even go up against an elite opponent and smack them around because you've got that high wattage offensive talent as well. And if you just sort of stabilize and systematize the defense a little bit, it gives you the opportunity to elevate. And then, they have not lost touch. I mean, there's a big gap between Boston and everybody else, right? But they are, I think, a game back of Cleveland now for second. They're right there. The Knicks continue as we mentioned their injury slide. So like the Bucks are still very much in that 2-3 mix. If Boston picks up a knock and they go on a run, it could absolutely be within hailing distance of one as we get down the stretch here. So there was so much said and so much ink spilled and so many minutes on podcasts like this talked about why you would move on from Adrian Griffin, what the idea would be, how is Doc Rivers even all that good, yada yada yada. And maybe not. We'll find out. The playoffs are going to be the truth serum for all of that. But in terms of just stabilizing and moving things in a direction where you can feel more confident about who the Bucks could be, I think we're starting to see that. And I think in terms of the hopes for the most competitive version of that top of the East, which could be an absolute bear of the first couple of rounds, I think that's a pretty positive thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the decision to move on from him, it's not to say that the front office is completely immune to criticism or bulletproof from that standpoint. But I feel like that's one of those things where if stuff is that bad or is that problematic, again, with regards to their process, you would get the impression that people in the building would know that more so than we would. So you can't judge it solely off wins and losses. I'll say this. I'll put it this way. There were some people, and I don't think it was a majority, but it was a very vocal minority of like, the Celtics need to move on from Missoula after the way the Celtics looked last postseason. Okay, if you're going to think that off of 1 year and 1 season where they were within a game of making it to the finals, granted they were down 3-0 and then they came back and made it a series. But if that's going to be your takeaway from a season where you watched the whole season play out and were frustrated about how it looked, the front office simply was saying it looked okay from a wins-losses perspective, but the process wasn't right. It's hard to see how one group of people could argue that after a season, after watching it, how it plays out, and the front office where they're more in tune with how stuff is actually coming along, what the players are saying, knowing about the rumblings that are taking place or maybe direct complaints that are happening. Like they fundamentally tried to take hold of something before it unraveled in a portion of the year where we would see it in the postseason. So I understood it, even if I didn't know all the ins and outs of it. Like you're only doing that if you see something glaringly wrong, or see the potential for something glaringly wrong, because this is a team that's trying to maximize its window. And I think Other teams kind of soft pedal it with that. You can't. It was a big decision to hire a first time head coach anyway. So if you see things that procedurally are not what you want, I understand it from that standpoint. I actually think that to some extent, if they were able to keep up this defensive improvement, that would be a pretty clear sign of the fact of like, even if this doesn't work, it was probably the right thought, unless you felt like you were seeing turnarounds during Griffin's time as coach. This is the first time in more than 2.5 years that they've held two opponents in a row under 100 points. And the transition part of it is massive. November 2021, maybe not more than 2.5 years, but about 2.5 years. So that's a pretty considerable sort of thing when you talk about that. That was something that was breaking their defense. And Doc has always been, I'm thinking back to a story that I wrote a couple of years ago about the value of rebounding, or the lack of value in rebounding relative to what it used to be, or big time rebounders like Andre Drummond and stuff like that. And Doc was talking about just I can remember in Doc's voice specifically the way he was talking about rebounding and transition defense, and the value of going for offensive rebounds versus just being back defensively so you can't get beat in transition. But anyway, neither here nor there. I think that was a really good call.